Today I'm joined by Dr. Lovell Francis, educator and historian whose work explores Caribbean history, culture, and identity. His insights will help us to understand how our past has affected and influences our present. So, welcome, Dr. Francis. Thank
Thank
you
you.
very much for joining me.
It's a pleasure to be here. Thank you very much.
Have you ever been asked to have a conversation about diets?
No, it's actually the first time.
Okay.
I've discussed it with students. I've lectured on the issue, I mean, in a very small way, about the importance of diet in terms of our identity, but also in terms of some of the issues we deal with today. But I've never really had a lengthy discussion on it. So this is my first time.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Let's see how it goes.
Yeah.
So, can you tell me who were the Amerindians and
It's interesting that you use that word, and I'll start there. Now, as an historian, a Caribbean historian, Amerindian is a word that we no longer use. The only academic people who are legitimate, who still use the word Amerindian, are archaeologists. And they have a particular area-specific reason for using that too. We avoid using the word Amerindian because it is a mishmash that really has no historical meaning or context. And there's a long discussion of Columbus behind this that I don't want to derail the whole discussion by going into. Let's just say it's an imagined identity. So we try to be more accurate in terms of historical context. So as a collective term, we would refer to the native peoples who inhabited the Caribbean before Columbus arrived here as First Nation peoples or First Peoples. If we want to get more specific, we very much avoid using those old terms, Caribbean Arawaks, which have no real basis in history of any kind. They are fabrications directly tied to Columbus, directly tied to wanting to enslave people here, directly tied to genocide. So no credible historian in the region uses those terms. If we want to get specific, we call them by the names they call themselves. Those who would have been traditionally called Arawak, we call Taino, because that's how they describe themselves. Those who would have been called Carib, some of them we call Kalinago, and there were many other groups. This notion of there only being two groups in the region is a misnomer. So all of that history is nonsense that has to be thrown away. But you have to understand why. It's because it was an imagined history. It was a created history by a man who had ideas of enslavement and then eventually genocide on his mind. So one of the things that we do as historians is try to remove the parts of history that have no basis in reality or evidence and replace it with facts that can be verified, historical facts, which are still questionable, but they can be verified in terms of evidence, and they are borne out by the reality that existed, not the ones that people imagined or created for their own purposes. So, Amerindian, out the window. Just call them First Nation peoples or First Peoples, and it's fine.
first 5 minutes and you already blew the conversation out the water?
Yes, kind of what I do.
Okay.
I spent almost a decade in university doing that same thing to students every year. Yeah.
Right. Okay, so then what was the lifestyle and diet of the first people like?
Lots of fish,
Fish.
lots of cassava. But before I even answer that, I want to make something fundamentally clear. We're talking native peoples in the Caribbean. I just said they were not two groups, they were multiple groups. The same for the North American continent, the same for the South American continent. What we often don't understand is that many of the foods that we think of as being European were actually created by these people. They were master agriculturalists. You will hear something called an Irish potato. Irish potato was actually, if not pioneered, modernized by the Inca people of Peru, which is in South America. So it is transplanted from South America to Europe, to Ireland, where it saves those people from starving. Well, saved until there was a blight in the 1840s that wiped out more than 1 million Irish people. Corn, maize, created by native peoples in what is now Mexico. So many of the foods that we think of as being American or European were actually created by these native peoples and then transplanted to Western Europe in particular, because up until the year 1500, the only place in the world where you could find people who were on the verge of starvation was in Europe. Everywhere else in the world was food abundant, including the Caribbean. And I make that point because I want to make another important point later on in the discussion. So think of the Caribbean. The question is, yes, what was their diet? And I could give you examples of foods that they ate. But the far more fundamental thing to understand is that the Caribbean was a food abundant region, producer of food, more than enough food to sustain millions of native peoples independently. Contrast that with the Caribbean now. That's a discussion for later on.
Yeah, but I'm going to try to stay focused.
Yeah.
All right. So you've already expressed the foods that were native to the Caribbean and to the First Peoples. Yeah. Any idea what their lifestyle was like?
I don't want to say hunter-gatherer. They would have initially been hunter-gatherer people. Now, there are parts of the history that we can verify that these people crossed the Bering Strait during the Ice Age. So there was a mass migration from Asia across a piece of water that was frozen over because of the climate at the time.
Right.
They end up in North America and they migrate south. They sail to the Caribbean. They populate the entire hemisphere. Your hunter-gatherer people, you're basically constantly on the move. They end up in the Americas, the ice thaws, the climate changes, and they settle down. And then they go through something called the Neolithic Revolution, which is a very fancy way of saying they discover agriculture. So instead of moving from place to place, looking for food sources or hunting your food source, you settle and you either domesticate animals that you will use as beasts of burden or for food, and then you start growing your own food. So revert again to the discussion of things like corn and like maize and all of those things that they created. Cassava, all of those things. Even cocoa, which is in some way also native to this hemisphere, as well as Africa, Ethiopia in particular, comes to mind when you talk of cocoa. So you have a people who moved from being hunter-gatherers who were always on the move to survive, because if you don't run down the animal and shoot them and kill them and skin them and cook them,
They hunt you.
they hunt you or you eventually starve.
Okay.
Right? And then they go through a process of discovering agriculture, start growing your own food, which will lead to a number of things. One, you could have larger populations of people, because if you're constantly moving, that's a kind of a harsh societal construct. Anybody too old, anybody sick, anybody maimed, what happens to them? Because the safety of the larger collective is more important. When you have a society that becomes stable in terms of settling in one place where you have enough food to sustain everybody, then you could have also specialized jobs. Somebody could be the chief.
Right.
Somebody could be the priest. People could be soldiers. People could be warriors. People could be cooks. Before that, everybody has one job, hunter or gatherer. You have people now your society becomes more sophisticated. So what you have in the Caribbean is a group of people who've gone through a long developmental process, but at the end of which they have very sophisticated societies. You look at North America, you look at Central America, South America, very sophisticated societies. The Mayan, Aztecs, the Incas, but even in the Caribbean. This notion that Europeans came here and brought civilization in the 15th century is one of the biggest lies ever told in human history. You had people here who had gone through an evolutionary process in terms of their development. They had strong, functioning societies, and then they end up being wiped away as if they never existed.
So do you suppose they migration or the move into agriculture could have been because of climate as well?
It's a natural process that human beings went through. So they didn't go through something that was unique to them. If you look at African civilization, European civilization, Asian civilization, we are a hunter-gatherer species. Human beings are a hunter-gatherer species. And if you look at the science, it will explain to you why we have some of the dietary issues we have today. We're a starvation species. We're accustomed to living on the verge of starvation. And when we kill that thing and we cook it and we eat it, we had to eat almost all of it because we can't store it for long. And then we're not sure where the next meal coming from. It might be a day, it might be days before we find enough food to feed
Family.
a family or an ethnic group or whatever term you want to use, a tribe, which has connotations I don't like, so I tend to avoid using it. We are a species that is accustomed to living on the verge of starvation. How long are you going to live like that? At some point, it's going to occur to you, yeah, if we could pick these berries, maybe we could plant them. Maybe if we could pick this corn, we could plant it.
Right.
And that's a part of human evolution as a society. It's not unique to the native peoples. It's not unique to Africa. It's not unique to Europe. Everybody went through that process where we went from running down the food to realizing, okay, let's domesticate and keep it right here. Instead of looking for the berries, looking for the nuts, looking for the bananas, figure out how to plant it, and right there when we want it. So part of human development, universally.
So would you say that their lifestyle supported better health outcomes?
That is a very interesting question. Normally, it's something because it's an intersection of things. You have the historical aspect of it, you have the medical aspect of it, you have the health aspect of it. I try to not make blanket statements that cannot be supported by evidence. Right. And I will draw your attention to the fact that up until the 20th century, life expectancy on this planet was low for most people. In the Caribbean, there's a very famous report called the Moying Report, where life expectancy in many of these Caribbean territories during colonialism was sometimes under 40 years. And we make the mistake of thinking that in the past, when the food was less organic, was more organic, less artificial, that people live longer. That is a misnomer. Long human lives, unless you believe the biblical stories, is a product of modern living. Up until the 20th century, most human beings had very short lives because, as a dietitian, food is just a part of it. There is also disease and other issues to deal with. So, and then, to be perfectly frank, there is no food on this planet that has come down to our time that has not been artificially modified by humans. Potato has been modified.
Yeah.
Corn, if you found any species of the original corn, we would find them difficult to eat. We have been tampering with plant life on this planet for millennia. What is happening now is that it is commercialized, capitalized. We're not sure exactly what they're doing, so there are concerns about it. But if you really want to understand, you really want to be fair, human beings have been modifying foods for thousands of years.
Yes.
So whether the food today is definitely not as healthy as it was back then, for reasons of commercialism, for reasons of ingredients. But need to remember on the other side of that, there are other issues that modern life has dealt with. We've eradicated some diseases, even though these idiots, am I allowed to say that?
Yeah.
those of us who think less, who think that measles and those things should be allowed to come back. So these things are re-emerging because of bad policy.
Correct.
Medicine.
Agendas.
Yeah. Different political agendas are allowing some diseases to become normal again that would have been
eradicated
or on the verge of eradication. Yeah. So remember, food is only one aspect of it. But sure. I'm speaking to the choir, preaching to the choir. Yeah. But the food, to go all that way to come back and ask a simple question, it would have been healthier back then.
Yes.
but it's only one part of the equation.
Yes, understood.
Mm.
So let's shift the conversation a little more into slavery.
Yeah.
How did slavery affect or change the way people ate from the perspective of the slaves?
Yeah. Right. I want to answer that in two ways. One is the larger system, the other is grounded on granular level on the plantation. What we often don't understand is that many of the foods that we think of as being distinctly Caribbean, and some other things that we also think of being distinctly Caribbean, don't really belong here.
Correct.
They were transplanted here in order to feed, and I'm putting feed in inverted commas for a reason, thousands of people who were brought here, captured against their will. So there are things that are not Caribbean in origin, like yam, like breadfruit, that we think of as being Caribbean, but they were transplanted here as cheap sources of food for the enslaved. Yam is West African. Breadfruit comes from the Pacific. And there's a very famous mutiny, HMS Bounty, where the crew of that ship mutinied against the captain. That ship was sailing to Trinidad with breadfruit to introduce breadfruit as a cheap source of starch for the enslaved people. So in many ways, our food culture, the foods available to us, that system of enslavement, that system of the slave trade and enslavement, we wrote our food history, introducing things from all over the world. I keep asking people, why is there bamboo in the Caribbean? Where does bamboo come from? Bamboo comes from China. Why is there bamboo in the Caribbean? Bamboo was brought here as a cheap source of starch for the enslaved. It tells you a number of things. They didn't care what they fed these people. As long as it could provide some sort of nutrition, and bamboo cannot. It is a grass. We don't have the enzyme cellulase to break down cellulose to get nutrients from grass. But they were basically trying any cheap thing they could find that could feed this mass of people, but it gives you an impression of how human they saw, or how they pretended that people of African origin were not human.
So help me understand the bamboo a little more.
Yeah.
I've never heard this one before.
Yeah, it's a nice anecdote I used to like to shock students with.
Right.
Yes. One of the reasons why there's bamboo in the Caribbean is because it was one of those experiments in terms of finding a cheap source of.
So what did they try to do to prepare it as a food item?
You know, bamboo is part of traditional Chinese dishes.
Yeah.
You could buy traditional Chinese dishes where the young bamboo shoots are
yes.
part of the
meal.
Yeah, they were trying that nonsense in the Caribbean.
Okay, I thought you meant the...
No. But it ends up growing, of course, it's a grass, growing wildly, and then it finds other cultural purposes like, preventing landslips in places like where I come from.
Right.
But it was one of those, much of what we consider to be Caribbean food, a lot of it are a series of experiments in terms of finding cheap sources of particularly carbohydrate for the enslaved.
Correct.
On the other side, let's talk the protein. I mean, we eat saltfish and smoked herring up to this day because once again, you're going to pickle, this disgusting herring. I don't know. Eat smoked herring, I and you cannot be friends to this day. You're going to get these burnt herrings and you're going to put them in these buckets and send them down to the Caribbean. Or you're going to take cod and salt them and send them down to the Caribbean because they're cheap.
Method.
Cheap sources, you're preserving them. And then they're very cheap. And you're going to, but it's part of a trade, connected trade that joins Africa, North America, Europe, the Caribbean, that is really meant to make one group of people rich. But you need to provide the minimum you can in order to provide carbohydrate, and then in this case, protein to people. That is an emblem of enslavement, and we're still eating the smoked herring and the saltfish to this day, to the detriment of our breath and probably our health. But that's
excessively high in sodium, correct?
Pigtails, very high in sodium. And we will talk, I'm sure, given your expertise, we talk more about that as we go on. But so you either import plants that don't belong here, because we could use them to feed people. Some of them, like yams, are very successful to this day. Breadfruit, very successful to this day. Or you import odds and ends, smoked herring, salted fish, pigtails to this day. And then the plantation is not centered on producing food, but you're going to rear animals because there are Europeans on the plantation who have to eat better food. And then the scraps from those things end up becoming food, the diet of the enslaved, the pigtails, the, the hog head, the cow heel. And then we take these things that are really throwaways and form a whole diet out of it.
Yes.
So what you have is a process changing the entire food landscape of the Caribbean because of the need to feed the enslaved. But I'll tell you this for sure. One of the things that people who do this kind of research often don't understand because they don't read the primary documents, that's the things written by the actual people themselves during the time, is that enslavement said you should have a ration of X amount of saltfish per week, X amount of smoked herring per week, X amount of whatever. More often than not, you never got the food, you know.
Correct.
You never got the food. You never got the rations because they literally did not care. You were collateral damage. As far as they were concerned, it was more effective and more efficient to work you to death and replace you rather than to feed, house, and clothe you. So, Trinidad, I have seen official records written, they're not even giving you the saltfish and the smoked herring. So you have to work your shift in the day, which might mean you out there as a woman in the fields, working for 18 hours in the day, especially during crop time when you had to burn that cane and cut that cane in the right time before the sucrose level drops to get into the plantation. You out there as a woman working long hours doing arduous labor because the men are often somewhere else doing something else that is also equally dangerous. And then at the end of it, you're not being fed and you have to go into your plantation grounds to grow your own food. So the enslaved people were in the midst of all of that ordeal of labor that they experienced, that shortened their lifespans, that reduced women's productive ability. Because, I mean, the science is clear. If you go to a doctor and you're trying to have a child and you're having problems, the doctor will tell you take a vacation.
Correct.
Yeah, because extreme physical work lowers your fertility.
Correct.
So I keep telling people that we are very all fortunate to be here. Our ancestors were a lot stronger than we give them credit for. So all of that nonsense is happening. You overworked, you underfed, and you still have to go and work again to produce your own food because these people are not feeding you. Because you are collateral damage. You are, as far as they're concerned, expendable until 1807 when the trade in enslaved people is ended. And then all of a sudden they need to keep you alive and as healthy as possible. Put that in inverted commas, as long as they can, until the system ends in the 1830s.
So,
And I'm really derailing this thing by just going all over the place.
You're not. I'm just thinking. So this is they have the saltfish and the smoked herring and all the different things being shipped to the Caribbean.
This is their business.
And correct. So I'm thinking slavery, it was a business. Correct.
Let me draw a parallel now.
Okay.
So you have a very successful company that has 10,000 workers that is making 6 billion profit a year. And then because you could introduce AI, you fire half of your workforce, put them on the bread line, and then maybe your profit stays the same or it goes up by a little bit, but you've displaced thousands of people. And I'm saying all that to say in a very polite way that the kind of mindset that drove enslavement is still running around on this planet. Oh, walking around very slowly on this planet.
Correct. I know that for sure.
Yeah.
But I'm thinking if they are shipping these things across the Caribbean, they're not giving it to their slaves. Some of it, I'm not sure how it may have been distributed in the first
Maybe you
place.
need 10 buckets and you order 5.
Right.
Maybe
Make
you
it
need
stretch.
because what you want to maximize profits.
So then what were the slave masters eating?
No, they were eating
Irish potatoes.
well, they would import food for them, but the
Okay.
whatever in particular the meat, whatever meat produced on the plantation, the best cuts or the real meat went to them,
Right.
and the
And the scraps were
scraps
given to the slaves.
enslaved, they rearing the animals, they
Right.
slaughtering the animals, but the meat going left.
And I suppose if they try to hide peace, hide peace for later, how would they know? How would they know that?
Overseer.
Yes, that is
Remember,
true.
it's a system, you know.
That is true. There was
Yeah.
always the
There's
overseer.
always somebody.
Okay, so they had definitely had to be creative with preparing their meals.
There's no alternative.
Yes.
There was no alternative. So we took scraps.
So we have that
We
like
took
tawheel soup.
transplanted things. We took subpar food that was considered only fit for people like us. And then we took the scraps from the things that were actually reared on the plantation, and we created a whole suite of food, a whole diet, a whole cuisine, a whole regional
Correct.
cuisine. And if you do enough research, there are parallels in the American South. They mightn't have the small fish and the smoke herring, which was more of a Caribbean
Right.
thing. Yeah, yeah. So we created a whole cuisine based on scraps and what we could cobble together.
Based on survival, really.
Yeah, it's people surviving.
Yeah.
And then I would argue that we created the best food in the world out of it. So, and the irony is that things that would have been considered slave food, they're now expensive. When last you went and buy upstairs in the grocery? It is Mr. Upstairs.
I saw the price. Listen.
Saltfish ain't cheap.
Saltfish isn't.
Smoke herring is not cheap.
It is
So what used to be,
Scowie not so bad.
yeah, not so bad. But what used to be slave food, which is food that would not be considered fit for certain palates, is now very expensive. That is one of the grandest ironies in all of this. But you really had people who had to be tremendously innovative just to survive, because they couldn't even get the basic things they were supposed to get as part of the system that had them enslaved.
Then there's the spiritual, for want of a better phrase, aspects or influences that may have been used to tie food. Example, Olia's night, everybody must have black-eyed peas and rice because spiritually it's believed that it's a form of prosperity.
Yeah.
Would you say that came
Now remember,
from...
food has never been just food. Food has cultural connotations.
Correct.
Food has religious connotations. Food has healing connotations. So if you grew up in a country like me, and I mean, you're very pleased in Trinidad, more country than Marina, you know that in addition to having your little kitchen garden, you're also growing the seasonings to get the food to taste properly.
Right.
And you're also growing things that are medicinal, often in the same little garden. So food, the agriculture was not just about food, and in the narrow sense, food in itself is a variety of things. And of course, you can't divorce the spiritual from that. You can't divorce the other things from it. So, but during enslavement, that was also problematic, because one of the things that colonial rule determined very early is that any assertion of African culture, particularly spirituality, was a threat to the system of enslavement, because enslavement is really control for capitalist production. Anything that disrupts that or is a threat to that, and I could go into a whole Obia discussion now, which we really should not go into, but there's a reason why every Caribbean society has Obia laws, and more often than not, the penalties for practicing Obia, again, herbs and all of these things, was either death or severe dismemberment. So food has never just been about nourishment. It's been a whole kaleidoscope of things. And yeah, that spiritual side was important. And that spiritual side was also problematic. Because anything that allowed the enslaved person to be a person, to have a culture divorced from the context within which they were trapped, was a threat to the system itself.
Just have me thinking. Okay.
Well, that'll be good for something. Men should be good for something.
I'm thinking as well, food aside,
Yeah.
slight deviation. Some of the things we do, example, you grew up with your parents telling you, you must be seen and not heard. You know, stay in the back. Don't let other people know what you're doing. That is not their business. And if they know, then they can do it before you, or they can sell you out, or different things. Would you say those things also came from slavery?
Um, I am not a cultural expert, but one has to be very careful in looking at these things, understanding what is originally from Africa, what is what I'll use the cultural term as syncretism, meaning a mixing together of African and other influences, and what is really a byproduct of colonial domination. My mother would say to me as a child, those who don't hear, just feel, will feel. You're born in Trinidad, your mother going to say that to you.
Correct.
That is West African.
Okay.
That's African. In fact, it's not West African, it is African. Those who don't hear with their ears, if you're in South Africa, they will tell you those who don't hear with their ears will feel with their skin. That's an African thing. Obia, which people think is African, is not African. It is a syncretism. It is a mixture of some lingering aspects of West African culture and European Catholicism mainly. Because if you look at the areas where Obia is I don't want to say prominent, but I think it's normally places where you have Catholicism being a dominant religion. Trinidad, Puerto Rico, Haiti. Because it's really a mixture of two things. Yes. In Africa, there's something called muti. If you come to South Africa, it's not the same thing. What will religious constructs become in European imaginations? Oh, black magic. And that's a whole different long discussion that we could have another time. But we have to be clear as to what is African. Some things are African, but more often than not, what we end up with is a mixture of whatever lingers from Africa and whatever is added to it here. And sometimes we create something new. And then if you look at, for example, Carnival is a very good example of that. Something that we create. There's an old world template for it, but we just make it better by melding things together that, logic says should not really operate together, but somehow we make it work. Right. Yeah. So I will leave that question to the cultural expert, but I can just give you a framework for understanding it. Some things are straight out of there. Some things are created here. Some things are imposed on us. That be seen and not heard is a mechanism for control. That's a colonial nonsense. Yeah. Women must know their place is a colonial nonsense. Yeah.
A learned behavior in a sense.
Yeah.
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 All right. So let's shift into indentureship. So how would you say that, this snapshot in history influence our food culture?
So you have native food culture.
Right.
Much of that is wiped away. And you have this food culture being cobbled together because you need to feed these enslaved people, and ad hoc and vice versa, that's going to bring things, and then the enslaved people on the plantation are going to create a food culture out of bits and pieces and scraps. And then you bring a vivid, if you've ever been to Asia, vivid food culture with indentured people, and they add to the mix. But even they go through a process of, I want to use a term that people don't understand because we use it incorrectly. The correct cultural term for this is creolization. Creolization is basically something comes from somewhere else, and just by being here in this region, it becomes Caribbean. The correct cultural term for that is creolization. Okay. So if you go to an Indian restaurant in London asking for Indian food and you expect to get what we get in Trinidad, problems. Part of that is the fact that India is a massive subcontinent with 1.4 billion people, with huge differences in terms of culture and interpretations of culture, huge differences in terms of food. So the food from northern India, southern India, central India, east coast, west coast, north, markedly different. But Indian food becomes Indo-Caribbean food. So the food that we think of as being Indian has aspects of Indian food in it, but it's really Indo-Caribbean food. Indian people come here and they modify, because everybody's doing that. Everybody is modifying given what is available to them and coming up with something new. So Indo-Trinidadian food is a unique phenomenon for Trinidad, for Guyana, for the Caribbean. We come here and we create our own thing.
And we
it ends,
discover where's the best.
and it ain't no feeling that. There's no feeling that.
Gosh, it might be
Yeah.
a biased perspective.
Yes, and there's nothing wrong with being biased. There's nothing wrong with being biased once you have evidence to back it up.
So I'll give you a small story. When I was in London, I was in a house, I was renting, of course, as a student.
Yeah.
Renting different rooms. It was more like a room share. And my housemate next door, she was from India. And one day she came home from work, saw me in the kitchen cooking, and she's looking, walking out and coming back. And I realized, okay, she's purposely coming in the kitchen just to see what I'm doing. And then one day she said, what are you doing? So I said, I'm making dal and I'm mixing roti. And she looked at me like, oh my gosh, like, where are you from? Like, you're doing it wrong.
Yeah.
And I was like, how do you mean I'm doing it wrong? This is how we make dal. She's like, where's the egg? I was like, egg and dal? And they put boiled eggs, hard boiled eggs in dal. And they also eat dal with yogurt, which is totally different
Totally
from the way we eat dal.
Yeah. So Indian food in Trinidad is Indo-Trinidadian food. Indian food in Guyana is Indo-Guyanese food. Indian food in St. Lucia is Indo-St. Lucian food.
Right.
It is some retainers of India, but it's also its own legitimate thing. And there is absolutely nothing wrong with that. The largest Indian population out of India is in South Africa. I attended, just before I came back to Trinidad, the Independence Day celebration by the Indian High Commission. And there were people doing Indian dance, and I was like, these people, I could bring Shiv Shakti here to outdance them. Because you know that Trinidadian, we always feel that we're the best at everything.
Correct.
Yeah. But given my Trinidadian mentality, I was looking at the Indians and saying, I seen better than this. I could bring a group from Trinidad and we could outdance them.
Yes. And they may also look at us like,
Yeah, you're doing the wrong thing.
yeah, what is that?
But we're doing our own thing. And that's absolutely nothing wrong with that. So what you have is a complex food culture with many historical foundations, and you're just adding pieces to it. So enslavement sort of sets the table for what is going to be our culture of cuisine. It's going to be a kaleidoscope of different things. An Indian indenture just adds more to it, and every group that comes, because you have people from the Middle East coming, you have more people from Africa coming, which you're going to end up with a very complex food culture that, I mean, because we are immersed in it, ends up being entirely normal for all of us. So if I go to a wedding and I do see basap chat and curry, I feel like I should have stayed home. And you could go to a wedding now and it's normal to have 2 courses. You have the rice and the whatever.
And then you have roti.
And then you have the roti. And I come in for this, not for that. And that is entirely normal in our context.
Yeah. So we had the East Indians bringing in, the spices.
Indians.
Sorry. They had the Indians bringing in the spices and the curries. And it has, I guess, added to the melting pot, as you said.
Yeah.
And it all forms
It is
part
its
of what?
melting pot. It's its own thing, but it's also part of a larger construct, and that is how these things go.
So I'm also curious as to the role women play as it relates to food and culture.
Yeah, absolutely fundamental. I grew up with a mother who believed that any man who could not cook was entirely useless and should be sent back to the factory.
I like that.
Yeah, but
The factory.
sent back to the factory for upgrade. But I mention again, the plantation was the template for all of these things. So the fundamental experience in terms of all of this is African enslavement. African enslavement sets the table, bad pun intended, for all of these cultural permutations that we see going down the road. And I'll say it again, field work was primarily women's work. Back when I used to teach people like your husband, I used to ask them what the men were doing on the plantation, and they would say, well, men in the fields, growing the cane, cutting the cane. What are you men doing in the house? I say,
Doing what?
if you have 100 on the plantation, all them in the house, what are you doing, hanging out the window? More often than not, the men were the ones in the factory making sugar. The women were the ones
Cotton cane.
doing the hard work in the field. I've already said that. Women were also the ones growing the food. Women were also the ones preparing the food. So the food culture has always been tied to womanhood. Part of that was the gender biases that came not necessarily from Africa, because African society is tremendously complex with these things, more often than we understand, but had to do with colonial norms of what a woman should do, what a woman should be. So women are preparing food. After emancipation, we have cultural issues in Trinidad and all of these other Caribbean islands because you have people who were brought here as chattel for labor. They weren't human. And all of a sudden, you give them a kind of partial freedom because emancipation was not freedom. And you're telling them now they had to be in the house and they had to be a wife and a mother and they're not going to work anymore. And how is that going to work? But women were integral to the food culture and they still are. But I'll say it again. And I would advise any woman listening to this podcast, if the man can't cook, send him back to the factory for an upgrade or find another one. Because a grown man who cannot cook is, good parts are useless.
Oh, gosh.
In my opinion.
Understood. So, also in East Indian, correction, in Indian culture, so I had a client some years ago. She came in because her cholesterol levels were high. Didn't understand how. And we sat and we spoke about, her diet, what she usually eating on a daily basis. And I noticed one thing and I asked her, why are you frying everything? Everything you eat is fried okra, fried tomatoes, fried eggplant. Why is everything fried? And she thought for a moment and she said, well, when I was getting married, this is how my mother-in-law taught me to make everything to please her son, because this is how she cooked for her son. And I asked, well, what about his health? Which he was fine. He had no issues. But that realization for her, it turned on a light bulb like, oh my gosh. And that's something I think we take for granted.
I did all the cooking at the mission when I was the High Commissioner because food was expensive to cater. A lot of South African food did not satisfy my palate because I like food that has taste. So I was like, I'm going to create a gimmick. I'm going to be the High Commissioner who cooked. And it worked. But I remember cooking some stewed chicken for an event we had. So I'm cooking huge trays of stewed chicken. And one of the ambassadors comes and he sees me browning the sugar. And he's like, you're burning sugar to cook chicken. What are you doing? What are you doing? Is this going to be healthy? And I had have to assess what I'm really doing and where this comes from. All of these things tie back to this need to feed people with either the lowest number of ingredients or the least number of ingredients or the lowest quality of ingredients, and finding a way to make something that really shouldn't taste good. And unfortunately, in our context, that has health consequences.
Correct.
But it's also a cultural thing. This is how we do it. If you actually stew chicken without sugar, what are we doing?
There are other things you can use.
Yes, there are other things. But my mother say, you brown the sugar. So I, who probably should know better at this stage, still browning the sugar.
And that's the point right there. Women carry the culture, they preserve culture and traditions without even knowing it.
Yes.
Because we teach children how to cook.
And
we teach the way we do it.
And we think of culture as being something positive. Yeah. But culture is often neutral, or culture can have negative consequences. Because this is how we do it might mean we have high incidence of diabetes. We have high incidence of hypertension. We have high incidence of obesity. We have rising obesity. We have children suffering with cancer and kidney failure and heart disease, which is something that we would not have known about or heard of as much before. And all of that might be tied to this is how we do it.
Yeah. So, post-slavery. I'm thinking post-slavery, then we had indentureship. What did the woman, so you said they were now home with their
No, no, no.
families?
Colonial society says you must become a wife,
Housewife,
housewife.
right?
But you have women who are
Workers.
who are workers. How are you going to trap them in the house now, being just somebody's wife and a mother?
Do you know what happened?
Yeah, you're going to have women going to live close to the town and becoming seamstresses
Okay.
and becoming maids and becoming housekeepers and becoming. You can't tell me. I mean, I wasn't earning a wage while I was working. All of a sudden now,
Don't work.
I must not have any kind of agency as a woman. I mustn't have any kind of independence. I mustn't be able to earn money when there's money to be earned. You have women who conform. You have women who rebel. You have women who do things that are savory. You have women who do something that society does not consider savory. But you have women who want to retain as much of their control of self, control of body, as they can. But colonial society says that you are now almost the property of the man. So you have that tension happening in society. People don't understand in Trinidad and Tobago up until even jobs that were women jobs. I used to be a teacher. Teaching was a woman job. Nursing was a woman job. Up until the 1950s, if you were a teacher or a nurse, which was a woman job, quote unquote, and you got married, you had to leave the work. You had to leave the job. You had to resign. You had to give up your career. So there used to be a thing that I, during my years of research, would have interviewed a number of women in Trinidad who, given the choice between career and profession, between profession and family life, chose profession. So they never had children, they never got married because society did not allow them to have until the 1950s, which is not a million years ago. A woman couldn't have a job and a family. In fact, they didn't want you to have a job in the first place, but even the jobs that were women jobs, you had to leave that job when you had a family. So many women opted, I know women who opted to become, we call them bachelorettes now, but back then they were called spinsters. And that would be the woman, you'd see all these kind of weird things in the village. That woman was the one, Isukunya, because she was problematic in terms of what the norms of society were considered to be. She didn't conform to the rules. Yeah. So she was always, something was wrong with her, so she's a spinster. Right. Now she's a bachelorette. Now it's normal. But back then, you were an anomaly, you were a problem.
Right. So when we speak about matriarchal versus patriarchal society, the colonialists for the...
Definitely patriarchal. But many people who came here from West Africa came from cultures that were matriarchal. So you always have that tension there. But colonialism is going to try to rewrite the culture of all of the people who it tries to dominate as a mechanism of control. It wants you to conform to its norms and its mores. And you try to force people into a very strict box so that you could kind of retain control of them. So you're always going to have that kind of a tension where this is what we retain from here. It is opposed to what you're trying to force me into here. And it's a constant struggle that happens.
Yeah.
My mother, when she was 17, she left school because she passed on Aparima girls. Back in those days, there was no what we mistakenly and erroneously and dangerously call free schooling, which is not free. It's state. State pays for it. It's not free. You want free? Water even free.
Yeah. It's free to you.
Yeah.
Somebody paying for it.
Somebody paying for it. So if somebody paying for it, it's not free. There was no support for her to go from a poor rural family. She had to leave and go and work as a maid in Port of Spain, and that's what she did until she had me, and then she opted to become. She chose to become a housewife because she wanted to raise this DEVIL properly. Turns out to be a good decision for me, but I used to spend my time wondering how she felt about that sacrifice, because my mother was a fiercely independent woman. But society says that she must, as the mother, give up her profession and
Take care of the family.
take care of the family.
Yeah.
Nowadays, women ain't doing that foolishness unless they really, really want to. And that, to me, is a palpable sign of progress.
Right. So, but there's also culture within the household.
Yeah.
So, where would you say the culture of, the man must have his food first? He must get
It's a colonial thing.
best piece of meat.
It's a colonial thing. I'm not sure if that comes from Africa, because African culture is oftentimes very matriarchal. But that becomes a cultural thing where the man is the head of the house and the man is the boss and the man and all of that. But even in the midst of that, what society say didn't always happen in the house. And I don't like to give example by anecdote, but I'll tell you my family again. My family, yes, my father was the head of the household, but my mother was the boss. And everybody knew it, including him. And he was happy for that. And I'm saying that not to say the example is the norm, but I'm saying that in that society says this, but how people navigate those things within the family unit is oftentimes never as straightforward as what society said. And then women have a way of asserting their agency in very different ways. There are many women who, for centuries in the Caribbean, have been very good at driving vehicles from the back seat. And I'll say no more. I'll talk less about that. Women have always found ways of showing agency, even when society said they should
don't have a
not,
voice.
because they're not stupid. They're not stupid.
At least they try to.
Yeah.
They try to have a voice.
Yeah, and quite often it works. I tell people, we have a wrong concept of rebellion on the plantation. We always think of resistance and rebellion as being male things. The men get vexed, run up the hill, and they do whatever. Most rebellions didn't start so. It was well understood, and you could see it in the records. The people to keep on the right side of were the enslaved women, because they'll poison you and you're dead. Or they will do what women do best. They go home and they get the men angry, rile up the men, and then the men run up the hill and do whatever. Oftentimes, women were as integral to resistance to enslavement, or more integral than the men. It often starts with the women. One of the most famous
Quiet voice
cases.
in the background. The quiet voice in the background.
Yeah. Or maybe not so quiet. We have many instances in the Caribbean of women working in the house who were assaulted by the slave master, poisoning the whole family, or inciting riots, inciting revolt, rebellion on the plantation. Understand, the most famous example of a rebellion in the Caribbean is the Haitian Revolution. It starts with a slave woman named Cecile doing an invocation. It starts with a woman. The Haitian Revolution starts with a ritual performed by a woman named Cecile. There's another guy named Bookman, but Cecile.
Right.
So this notion that women were just somehow passive, just did whatever society said,
False.
totally false.
And what type of society do you think we have now? Or at least how would you describe it? Would you say it's a mix of matriarchal and patriarchal? Does one prevail over the other?
Let me give you a nice historical way of answering that. In society, there are always forces of continuity and there are always forces of change. And they're in constant conflict. There are always forces that say, this is how we do it, and this is how it must be done. And there are forces that say, we must change this for better. And they're always in conflict. They will always be in conflict. So what you'll have is a society in the midst of that. And that's where we still are today. There are forces that say, there are men in this day and age, in 2026, who still think a woman's place is in the home. There are men who still think that. I think we've reached the point where those men we all look at as being dotish. I could be wrong. But from my observation, I think most of us have come to the point where we understand that a woman is a human being who has the same agency, the same wants, needs, desires, same ambitions that men do, and that is how it should be. And I'll say this as a person who has lived in societies where women do not have the same number of rights that men do. That any man who don't understand that one of the greatest beneficiaries of female emancipation is men is a fool. In societies where women are not emancipated, the entire burden falls on the man. To get the woman, you have to go and get 10 cattle and satisfy her father or her mother that you are deserving of being allowed to be with their daughter. And if you mistreat their daughter in any way, because you mightn't be, depending on where you are, you might not be able to afford the 10 cattle, the 20 cattle. The entire total becomes due. In Trinidad, hey girl, I like you. You might get 3 if you're lucky. In societies where women are not emancipated, it is more difficult to find a woman, a girlfriend, a wife. It is more difficult to maintain your family economically. Men benefit as much from emancipation of women as women do. But many men cannot see past their noses, and they don't understand that.
True. So within our society,
Yeah.
outside of, slavery and indentureship, were there any other ethnicities you say their influence form part of our food culture?
Everybody who came, because after emancipation, we had a whole stream of indenture. Indian was just one of them.
Chinese.
Yeah, Chinese, people from the Middle East, Syrian, Lebanese. Everybody has contributed something, quote unquote, to the pot. And you end up with what is a very varied and very interesting culture of food that is probably killing all of us right now. But yeah, everybody plays a part. But I want to make one point before it slips from my mind. We have this concept that post-emancipation, we ended up with a much freer society that operated for the betterment of the majority of the people here. I mentioned a report called the Moyne Commission report earlier in the discussion. I need to just talk a little bit about that, because you need to understand that if you want to understand the evolution of our food history. In 1937, we had the famous Butler riots in Trinidad, June. What people don't understand is that that was one episode of a larger British West Indian revolt against colonialism. So up and down the islands, almost every island at different points in the year had some sort of, I don't want to say uprising, but some sort of social cohesion that was really geared towards undermining colonial control. We had Butler. If you look throughout the history, all the islands had it. Now, there is evidence which says that was planned and orchestrated. And there's a longer history of soldiers who fought in World War I, who went to Europe to fight, were treated very badly, faced racism, and decided we're going to deal with them. And they probably took like 20 years later to come up with something. But evidence on that is not totally clear, so I'm just telling you that as an anecdote. But it didn't happen ad hoc.
Right.
And the people who were behind it, like Butler, was a soldier who fought in World War I and faced racism for the first time in his life. The pure thing. To see what it was? Yeah. At the end of that, what happened in the Caribbean is what always happened. The colonial government sent out a set of white man to do a report. That report was led by a guy named Moyne, so it's called the Moyne Commission report, but it's really the Royal blah, 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 blah Commission. Long, stupid name. Anyway, one of the things that commission report made perfectly clear in the Caribbean is that Caribbean people were living on the verge of starvation. Caribbean people in 1937, working Caribbean people were living on the verge of starvation. We had severe malnutrition issues and the high prevalence of diseases like beriberi and rickets and scurvy, thing you don't even hear about now, that are tied directly to nutrient deficiencies, were normal in the Caribbean. So you think emancipation come and you're free now. You're free to have a better life, but it really is just legal freedom. We're really going to try to squeeze you in the same way as possible, as much as we can. Are we going to pay you I have in my possession primary documents, research from primary documents. Because the commission went to every island and had like forum where they would ask plantation owners, ask citizens to give evidence in front of them. And asking the plantation owners in Trinidad if they understand that they are paying their indentured workers, Indian workers. This is after indentureship. Wages that will not allow them to live healthy lives. And then they're like, yeah, well, anyone to send the money back to India, so let them starve. Kind of thing. So the difficulties in terms of diet and nutrition that came from that system of ultimate abuse, which was enslavement, didn't just evaporate after it ended, The same modus operandi, the same mindset is driving things. So up until the 1930s, 1940s, people in the Caribbean still malnourished. All of Trinidad, Tobago, we're still being treated as if we are chattel who are here just to produce raw materials to make them people across the Atlantic rich. It didn't end in 1838.
So
It probably ends after independence when we get rid of them.
you mentioned race, and we do live in a society where there may be a lot of racial undertones among things. Where do you think that came from?
Well, human beings are stupid in the sense that we look at surface level things and we pretend they are fundamental things. I can give you the whole scientific discourse. There's no such thing as race. We're all a species of clones. We're all the same, basically. Just minute differences that show up on the surface. But we interpret that because we are visual creatures to think there's a whole big difference between me and you because I come from Africa, you come from Europe, you come from Asia. And then in the 19th century, these white people were trying to prove their superiority, and they create a culture of race and a hierarchy of race that we have not yet understood we need to get rid of. And it's still wreaking havoc all over the world
2020.
to this day. But if I am a colonial, I'm in the business of colonial domination, colonial control. And I have one group of people here who I no longer have absolute control. I have another group of people here that I am importing to do the work that this group used to do. It is in my interest to have them fight them,
against each other.
because if them and them realize of I am the problem, then I will have problems. So it's classic divide and conquer. It's classic sowing seeds of discord. It's classic privileging one and deprivileging the other to make them into adversaries. We are, in many ways, to this day, still products of our colonial history. And one of the reasons why we are as we are, whatever that is, I will be perfectly frank with you. There are places in the world where different ethnic groups can't live together and they look the same.
Correct.
We look differently, but we will cuss and quarrel and blah, 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 and talk stupidness on social media. But basically, we still living comfortable next to each other and we have not descended into chaos. So there is a danger in overblowing something that is a colonial construct that in many ways we've learned to live beyond. But it doesn't mean that the thing is not there, because one of our problems in Trinidad and Tobago is that we have not invested enough of our brains and our bandwidth into really understanding our history. So we haven't gotten beyond the traps that are built into it. We're still there.
Understood.
But it's not as bad as we like to imagine, because there are people who look exactly like their neighbor, may have a slightly different culture, and they're killing each other every day. We're not doing that to that extent.
That's very true.
But we like to imagine, but we understand that we have issues and they're really historical, based on colonialism.
So moving on to modern times, how would you say our economy now influences what people eat?
Well, that's a very interesting question. Our food is imported. Our food import bill is outside the stratosphere,
It is.
And that is a dangerous place to be trapped within. And I told you I was going to talk about this down the line. And so I started telling you that the Caribbean was a place that was food,
Rich.
where food was abundant. We're now a place where we have a food deficit. And we should have learned something during COVID, but Trinidadians tend to be immune to education when they choose to be. Because when those shipping lanes were problematic during COVID, we were literally on the verge of starvation. Because so much of our food is important, we cannot feed ourselves. It is a direct consequence of enslavement and capitalist production here, which was never centered on food, to the point where we cannot feed 1 point, wherever it is, 4 or 5 million people on a weekly basis. And if those food imports don't come, we will starve. And we live in comfortable as if that is a normal thing. But it is a normal thing. It's a normal thing because that's the history we've had since Columbus brought his blighted self here. And we have not been able to move beyond it. But that is a danger. Relying on someone else for your sustenance. Who does that? Not even our ancestors. They used to run down the animals. They crossed our continent running down the animals because they understood the need to feed themselves. We in 2026 cannot feed ourselves because we live in a perpetual state of madness brought to us by our history that we have not been able to move beyond. People will tell you we don't have the landmass. Fear. I have seen plans from the 1970s where Dr. Eric Williams had a plan to make Guyana into the breadbasket of the region because they have land, and that CARICOM as a group would focus on producing food that we have enough for the whole Caribbean. And in 2026, if some kind of thing happen again and the ships saying come, we go eat each other. It will be the first real history of cannibalism in the region. So we live in a very perilous state in that sense. Then what are we importing? Is it better than what we can produce here? Is it more nutritious than what we can produce here? Is it potentially healthier than what we can produce here? The answers are so obvious, I don't need to say it. No. I don't need to say it. What are we importing?
There was one time this was probably 2012, where there was something called Partners Forum, where there were someone at the table from different sectors of Trinidad and society. And I was able to meet someone from Ministry of Agriculture, and I think it was Trade and Imports. And I, for a quick glimpse, got a literal glimpse of the food import listing. And just by looking at the list, you can tell, oh, this is why, heart disease is so prevalent, because of what is being imported.
Yeah.
But my thing is, how do we get back? Or do you think it's possible to, anyway, I feel like that's a direction we should go into.
It's possible, but we tend to be impervious to change until it is forced. Until it is forced. Until it comes to a point, and I always make this analogy. One of the benefits, in inverted commas, of living in Trinidad is that we don't have to eat what we produce. And I don't mean that in terms of food or agriculture. One of the realities we face here that is very dangerous is that our lifestyles are not tied to our productivity. Why? Because we have this thing called oil and gas that most of us are not involved in, that most of us know nothing about, that covers the fact that we are not productive enough as a people. But we get this money from this goop. They drill out of the ground, and that covers we are not a productive people. We don't produce enough across the board, and food is just one aspect of that. But we've been skating since 1973, coasting is a better word, since 1973, because of oil and gas. At some point, it will run out, and then our lifestyle will be dependent on how productive we are. And we ain't ready for that. And food, I'll say again, is just one aspect of that. If we had to feed this nation for a week without imports, what are you going to do? I went to Zambia in 2023, somewhere there, and the Minister of Agriculture in Zambia was saying that Zambia has grain stored for 2 years. So they could go 2 years without producing any grain, without importing anything and feeding their people. How long do you think we could last if the food imports stop today? You think we make it a week?
Probably not.
The ultimate slim fast program. It's called starvation.
Thanks.
Yeah.
And we have a habit of eating the same things every day, eating the foods we like every day. Let's use cheese, for example. You don't have cheese, you have nothing to eat. So
And then you wonder why your cholesterol is high.
if we have no cheese, there are some persons in Trinidad can't survive.
And the cheese coming from New Zealand. You know how far New Zealand is? We are importing cheese from New Zealand in 2026. You know why? Because the colonial empire had a construct where certain regions was produce certain things. And since colonial time, we importing cheese from New Zealand in 2026. I was telling people in South Africa, you all produce cheese, we could buy cheese from you all. We still buying cheese from you. And Milkana and Anchor from New Zealand in 2026. As if nobody else in the world closer is making cheese. Because we still follow colonial patterns of economic existence.
And who benefits from that?
The people who always benefited. Hasn't changed.
Interesting.
The dance is still the same. The dancers have changed, but the dance is still the same. And we have made the mistake of thinking that things have been transformed. They have not. They've just moved on. The same problems that came with Columbus landing here are still in the soil. We haven't dug them out.
Yeah. So most of our diet has been inherited and modified through survival. And now we're in modern times where we have a high food import bill.
High fructose corn syrup.
Well, that's a story by itself. What do you think can be done to improve our health situation?
When I was in primary school, they taught something called food and nutrition. I'm not sure if they teach it anymore. There are some things.
Small pockets.
Yeah. Maybe we should change. Maybe education is the way forward. Maybe we start there. I'm not going to tell everybody go and grow a backyard garden, but if you could do that. And then we still have this notion of agriculture being a man in a boots with a cutlass doing hard work. Agriculture is modern now. You could be lazy and produce food. Agriculture, there is successful agriculture that makes room for laziness.
Correct.
What I'll tell you, we need to produce more. We need to produce more across the board. We need to produce more food. We had better start producing more food. The world is going to come to a point in a not too distant future where things that we take for granted, water and food, are going to be the sources of chaos globally. And it pains me to be Jeremiah because I don't like that book in the Bible, but sometimes that is who I end up being. Food is going to become scarcer and scarcer on this planet as the climate changes. And we are going to have to become serious about ourselves at some point and find ways of producing more food and find ways of eating more of what we produce, not as a political gimmick, but as a survival strategy. Or the way forward is dim and dimming.
Yeah. What is one thing you wish Trinidadians or our persons in our society knew about Caribbean history and our food culture?
That it's not in the past. It's lingering. It's there with us. It's on the plate in front of you. Every meal you eat is emblematic of some form of Caribbean history. Either the survival on the plantation, the arrival of Indian immigrants, the need to survive in post-emancipation times, or the gluttony that came after the oil boom, where we could get anything we wanted and we could eat anything we wanted, especially foreign things. So we develop a diet that is foreign because foreign is better. Everything you eat today, everything I eat today is emblematic of a particular kind of history. Not all of it negative. surviving an ordeal for how many 100 years and finding ways to get beyond it. There's a story of triumph in there. There's a story of resilience in there. But some of it has to do with the ways in which we don't interpret our realities. But every time you eat a meal, there's a history of some kind in front of you. And we would all be better served if we understand it and understand the implications of it.
So, in an effort to improve our health, how do we honor our history, preserve our culture while improving health?
Laziness kills. Exercise does not kill. But knowledge is fundamental. Before I started doing serious historical research, never thought of food as anything beyond a plate or something to be enjoyed. Becoming an historian taught me the multifaceted nature of food and the importance of it, and just even the most basic understanding of how this thing has operated and how it operates is to your benefit, and benefit at a granular level. My family has a history of diabetes. Now, I could give you a long, winding talk about the plantation and draw a line from the experiences there to my mother, because part of it is environmental, we know part of it is genetic. But I understood very early that if my family has a history of diabetes, I need to get my big ASS up and exercise, because I need to reduce my body fat, particularly around my stomach area. And the healthier lifestyle I live means that I might be able to evade it. I'm 51 now and I'm still playing a dodging game with diabetes, and I plan to play that game for the rest of my life. But my understanding of my own particular family history within the broader context of culinary history of the Caribbean has framed my interpretation and my reaction to what could be a reality. And we all have the power to have that kind of agency in our lives. There are some things that the research is still not complete. Look, I'm drinking Coca-Cola today. I'm not supposed to be doing that stupidness. But I had an upset stomach this morning, and it's just the
hot cooks.
Yeah, it's the easiest solution to not having a kind of problem here today. Not supposed to be doing that stupidness. I'm a grown man. I drinking liquid chewing gum.
Liquid chewing gum. I like that one.
Yeah, look, but that's what it is. That's no nutritional values, just sugar and coffee.
Correct.
What is the point? But I do it. But I know, and maybe I spent 4 years in Africa not drinking Coke. I come back to Trinidad and fall back into bad habits. But at least I have the awareness. And I could decide tomorrow, I'm not drinking a Coke. So, in a very well way, a little education, I mean, a lot will be better, but even a little understanding in your personal context could make a radical transformation. So, I have children, I ban them from drinking Coke because not just to be punitive, but to explain to them why we shouldn't be doing this. And maybe they don't develop the habit. And then maybe somewhere down the road, the family has no diabetes hanging over it like a sword. So we have the power and the agency to change these things.
Right.
Not all of it entirely, but we could play a part in improving our wellness.
After you are educated, you are aware, how do you make the decision and become consistent?
You've already used the word educated. We have an improper understanding of that term. We think of education as something in your head. Education is an action thing. Education is an abstract noun, but being educated is an active thing. If I understand that drinking Coca-Cola is problematic and the excess sugar that I don't need could raise the chance of me having pre-diabetes and then diabetes, but I still drink the Coke, am I educated even though I have the knowledge? Education is an active thing. You have to show that you're educated. So I am not educated now on this because I know it in my head, but I'm still doing nonsense. When I show the discipline to cut it out or to reduce it to a point where it has minimal or no impact, then I'm educated. Education is always active. It's not a paper certificate you get. It's not something you have in your hair where you know, but you don't. You must show the behavior to be educated. So and if we go down that road, it says a lot about our system.
In a sense, education is the merging or the congruence between knowledge and action.
If you're not showing the action, you're not educated.
Right.
I don't care what you know. I don't care what paper you have. Until you show me the action or the change that goes with the knowledge, you're not educated.
Yeah. So one more question before we end. There's the concept of food as a love language. If parents with children or boyfriend or girlfriend,
I've been very guilty of that. I am still very guilty of that.
I love you, so I feed you.
Yeah.
I love you, so I give you what you like, even if it's not good for you. Any comments on that?
Yeah, something we do. It's part of our culture. But we could also even modify that. I had a health concern a few years ago, and I had a girlfriend who apparently loved me, who started cooking and forcing me to eat healthy. So instead of the grease and all of that, she would broil chicken and she would cook broccoli and she would cook vegetables and she would cook potatoes, and it tasted good and it was healthy. So even that could be modified in context. Yes, so I love you, so I feed you, but I have the chance to determine what I feed you. I have the chance to determine that I could make something that you might not normally eat taste as good as the trash we already eat, and thereby showing you I have greater love for you by having you have a better diet and then maybe better health to go with it. So it's part of our culture, but even that could be modified.
And how does that work for children? Let's say children don't particularly like vegetables, and they may see it as, you don't love me because you're making me eat healthy.
You see, now, you're going to put me in trouble now. Because I grew up in an era where it was eat it or lie down near it.
Right.
We've come to the point now where we have the facility and we have advanced socially enough where we could quibble about food. Our ancestors would watch us and have a heart attack.
Yeah.
Our ancestors who had to hunt everything or struggle on the plantation or put scraps together and would look at us mincing and fussing about food and think that we are overly. So we've reached a point in our society development that we could be entitled about food. But good parenting would take care of that. At the end of the day, life is not easy for all of us. Quite often, many parents don't have the facility of giving children what they always want. And if you raise your children properly, they will understand at times that not every meal is going to be the most enjoyable thing. And that is part of parenting. There were times when my mother cooked things that I did not like, but I ate because that was what we had. And that used to be a part of the culture that we've allowed to kind of go away. But good parenting, in my mind, kind of neutralizes that kind of thing. Or it can neutralize that kind of thing. And I, as Rastafari, do not believe in having no debate with no child for food. This is what I can afford. This is what we have.
This is what you will eat.
This is what you will eat. Or as I said, you will have the loveliest weight loss program, slim fat diet. Or do what my mother did to me. You eat cricks.
Cricks and water.
Cricks. There's always cricks. No, but I believe in children having agency and having independence and being able to speak their minds, assert their wants and needs. But I also believe in one of the things good parenting should do is to let children understand not all of the larger framework, but enough that their wants and needs, they understand that there must be limitations to it in context and in circumstance. I think that's part of good parenting.
Yeah, agreed. And what about family meal times? Traditionally, back in the day, Sundays, everybody would sit together and eat.
Well, I'm a child of the 80s. So in the 80s, when particularly things got rough after 86, when I would have been in primary school, sometimes the only time we eat meat was a Sunday. In the week was saltfish or smoked herring,
Or rice and peas.
or rice and peas, or pigtail, or salt beef, if you're lucky. That Sunday meal also had cultural connotations. In my family, my father was very much family oriented, so it wasn't just our family. His whole family would come together on Sundays. And all the cousins would come together down where he is from in Laloon, and there would be a huge bonding thing because we'd share meals every Sunday. cousins from all over the country, this large family gathering every Sunday until my mother got fed up of it. But food was also a basis for family, for a sense of
Sharing
community,
culture.
for sharing, for legacies being passed on. So that kind of thing still remains important, but
In
all of
modern
that,
times.
all of that could be done in a way that maybe we reduce the things that still dog us in terms of these NCDs and the high instances that we still face of it in the Caribbean.
And then there's the habits of sitting in front of the TV, everybody's in their own element.
Experiencing too. That those are templates that you could change by determining things in your household.
Yeah.
This notion we have that everybody's the same in your household is not a good template. Somebody has to be the adult. Somebody has to be the children. When the big people are adults and the children are children, it kind of works better. History says that. It works better.
Tried and tested.
Tried and tested for millennia.
Any closing comments for listeners?
Food is not just food. Food is culture. Food is life. Food has helped to determine the past. It has determined the present. It will help to determine the future. We all have the agency to eat better, to live lives of wellness, and to live the best lives that we can. And what we eat, and how we eat, and when we eat, how much we eat are integral parts of it. So food is just not something on a plate. It is a fundamental aspect of life. And as people, we can navigate that in ways that work for us. We could do it in ways that don't work for us. And every day, there's a plate in front of you. There's a chance to do something slightly better.
Thank you very much for having this conversation with me, Dr. Francis.
It's my pleasure. Talkers talk.
Thank you.
Cheers.